Welcome to our webinar today on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Art Legacy Project grants for fiscal year 2023, which for us runs from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023. I am Carolyn Koska. I'm the grants administrator here at Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. And first, I'll just start out and run down what we are going to talk about today. We'll talk just briefly about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. We'll look at the guidelines for this grant program. Then we'll go over to our website and see what resources are available for you there. We'll head into our grant system and walk through the application, and we'll finish up talking about the grant process or what happens after you submit an application. I'll ask everybody to keep muted for most of today. We'll stop a couple times for questions, and you're welcome to unmute then. And also at the end, if you'd like to talk more about your specific projects, we can do that as well. So Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMAC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota. By serving as a source of funds and technical services which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor, create, and promote the arts in their communities. So here is our region down in the southwest corner of the state. We are one of 11 regional arts councils that cover the whole state of Minnesota, working to get those state arts dollars out into all corners. So most of our funding does come from the state of Minnesota. We have an allocation from their general fund, but most of it comes from the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund. We also receive some funding from the McKnight Foundation for some of our artist grants and from memberships and donations from around our region. In order to apply, the applicant organization needs to be located in one of the 18 counties in our region, and those include Big Stone, Chippewa, Cottonwood, Jackson, Candy, Ojai, Lac-qui-Parle, Lincoln, Lyon, McLeod, Meeker, Murray, Nobles, Pipestone, Redwood, Renville, Rock, Swift, and Yellow Medicine, or tribal lands that are within that area. We acknowledge that this region occupies the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. So types of organizations that are eligible for this grant are 501c3 nonprofit organizations and units of government, which would be like a city or county government or tribal government. If your organization is kind of operating as a nonprofit, but you don't have your 501c3 status yet, you can still apply, but you'll need to have a fiscal sponsor, which would be an organization that is a 501c3 nonprofit. And then they will receive your grant money and manage that for you. So they are ultimately taking on the responsibility of the grant. So if you do that, you will need to sign an agreement between your organization and your fiscal sponsor organization, and that will need to be included in your application. And someone from that fiscal sponsor organization will need to sign off on your application as well. So our Art Legacy Project grant program, we're wanting this to be able to support large-scale projects that are going to leave an arts legacy. So we're looking for something that has much broader arts access in the community and a longer continuing impact. So this is not for sort of business as usual for your organization. This should be something out of the ordinary. So the kinds of projects that can fall under this grant are public art related things like a mural or a sculpture or some other form of public art. Or things like the first time your city is having an artist in residence. Maybe you are creating some site-specific theater involving your community, or maybe you have a multi-event celebration planned over the course of the year that really immerses your community in a particular art form. And we'll just take a slight detour and talk about another grant that we have called Quick Support for Organizations. And you can use this grant to do some funding for planning for your art legacy project, since that is a pretty big project. You can use this funding to get everything ready that you'll need to have in order to apply for the Art Legacy Project grant. So you'd be able to do things like get some input from the community. What are their ideas about what they want this project to be? You can send out some requests for qualifications for artists and then pay a couple of them to do proposals so that you can choose what you would like to have. Maybe you need to just determine what kinds of resources you have available versus what kinds of costs this project might have, or you might need to research some sort of feasibility or sustainability of the project, like how you are going to maintain your mural, for instance, over the years. So that is the sort of related grant where you could get some funding for your planning for one of these large art legacy projects. So the actual Art Legacy Project grant is available for up to $20,000. And then that Quick Support for Organizations grant is available for up to $2,500. In this current year, there are no matching funds required, which means that as long as your project costs within the amount of the grant you can request, your organization does not need to put up any funding toward that project. We've been allowing this just to make things easier for organizations during the pandemic, but we're not sure what our board will decide to do in the future. So it may be good to take advantage of this year while you can. Some things to be aware of as far as eligibility for these grants, some things that we can't fund. Like we mentioned before, this grant is not for your organization's regular programming, or if you, we could fund the first time you're instituting a new big project, but if it's recurring after that, we could not fund that under this program. Another ineligible cost would be just using this funding for a staff person for your organization. If that is something that you need, you should check out our operating support grants. We can't fund requests for new building construction, purchase of real estate, or endowment funds. We can't fund projects that don't have an art focus. Also ineligible are activities that are for profit, maybe related with a business. We can't fund educational projects within a school system. Under this grant, schools should go check out our Arts in the Schools grants. Also ineligible are activities not open to the public, activities that take place outside of Minnesota. Since we are using state funds for these grants, that is a condition of those funds. Also ineligible is religious socialization of the participants or audience, fundraising events. In other words, the grant is to help you have your project break even, not to make a profit. If your organization is already receiving operating support from us, you could not include operating type costs in the budget for this project. We can't fund payments of debts that are incurred before the grant begins. You can't use grant funds as a match for another grant from us, and applicants that have outstanding past due final reports are also not eligible until that is taken care of. So timeline for these, we have just one deadline for year per year for the Art Legacy Project grant. And that is coming up on November 9th. And the earliest you could start your project would be February 1st of 2023. Then for that quick support for organizations, that it has a monthly deadline, so you could apply anytime, really. That was open from August through May. Applications due the first of the month. And then the earliest you could start that planning project would be the first day of the following month. So for instance, if you quick submitted an application by October 1st here, then you could start working on your planning on November 1st. And also all of our deadlines, we need you to submit by 4:30 p.m. on that date. A little bit more about choosing dates for your project. You'll need to pick your project start date. And the first thing to do would be to check for that earliest allowed date, which in this case was February 1, because you can't start anything toward your project until that date. So you can't be doing any advertising, any auditions, any purchases. You cannot spend any funds before that start date. And your start date should then not be the first day of your event, because that wouldn't give you time beforehand to do all those preparations. You'll also need to choose an end date for your project and make sure to give yourself plenty of time. If needed, you can always submit your report early, but just make sure you have time to get everything done and be able to spend some time evaluating things as well. And grants that are awarded this year, those projects need to be finished up by June 30th of 2024. So you do have a fair amount of time on these. You'll need to have two people in roles related to this application. You'll need a project director, and that would be the person who's really in charge of all the day-to-day stuff on your project. And then you'd need an authorizing official, and that would be somebody from your organization that has authorizing power. Sometimes it happens that maybe the president of your organization is actually acting as the project director. So then they would need somebody like their treasurer to be the authorizing official. So these do need to be two different people, and both of them will need to sign all of the grant related documents, including your application. And I will pause just now for a few questions. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or type something into the chat.
Hello, this is Abdul Yusuf. I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
My question is, I have an organization called Somali Main Street Cooking. Will that help us if we apply the grants? We're teaching other people to learn how to cook dishes for like different cultures, and learning the culture of different people, to just bring the community together. That's what I'm doing. Would that be something that I can use for that grant if I apply for it?
We really have not included cooking related things under arts projects in the past, so I don't think that would work. But if there was something that your organization wanted to do that did bring in arts kind of things into your activities, that would be okay.
Kind of like the art, is it like, even though if we teaching the people the culture of that, also would that be something that is, or it has to be only art or something like that?
It would be depend on what kinds of activities you were doing and what area the focus of that was really on. I mean, if you were focusing on maybe traditional crafts and practices, that might work.
Okay, just trying to make sure that if that works or not, but just trying to figure out if it fits what I'm working on it.
All right. Yeah, feel free to contact us if you have more questions on that.
Okay. Yeah, that was my question. Thank you so much for your time.
Uh-huh.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, we're starting a barn quilt trail in our McLeod County, and we've got a good start on it. As we've painted about maybe 15 barn quilts on our fairgrounds, and so people are getting aware of what they are, and there's a lot of interest and everything. But I was wondering if this would be something that would work for getting a barn quilt trail started in our county with the funding just to help us get going, paying for supplies.
Yeah, I think if you can talk about how the project is leaving an arts legacy, I think that would work.
Yes. Okay.
And I think it may help once you're able to see some of the application questions and can kind of think about how, if you'd have good answers for those questions.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for now? All right, I think we will keep moving along here. We're going to head over to our website. And here on our homepage, I'm just going to point out the quickest way to get to our grant system is right here below the slides. There's this black grants box with a login button there. So that's the easiest way to get into our grant system. And then we're going to take a look at this workshops and assistance page. And this just is a good reminder of all the ways that you can get help and talk with us about your project. We have grant support open office hours the second Tuesday of every month from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. That's at our office in Marshall. So you can just stop in and kind of talk through your project. Or if you want to sit there working on your application with us nearby to answer questions, or if you need some help getting work samples attached or things like that, you can sure stop in then. We have a few grant Q&A sessions remaining this year. We had done some in-person ones earlier, and now we have some virtual ones going on. The next one of those is going to be December 13th, and that is just to ask questions about any of our grants. You can choose some time on my calendar to meet with me if there's anything you want to talk about. There's a link there where you can do that. And then here are the rest of our online grant workshops. So these ones that we've already done, there are recordings available of those. So if you come back here next week, you'll be able to see access the recording of today's workshop. Otherwise, you can register for future workshops here as well. So we're going to head over to our Art Legacy Project grants. And here's another place where you can get to our grant system. There's this Apply Now button at the top of each of our grants pages. That's another place that'll take you to the system login. So things that are available for you on this page, a bunch of materials. We have the guidelines for this grant program. You can take a look at what the application questions are. These are actually in a Word document. Some people prefer to work on their draft in that and then paste things into the system later. We've got a budget form, the criteria that the review panel will be using to score your application. And you can even take a look at the final report questions and see what you're getting yourself into there. Then we've just got a list of important dates for this grant program. We have the, I just noticed this is a wrong date on here. This should be coming up, but we have the date by which you can request a staff review of your draft. We'll talk more about that later. Your application deadline, the date that the review panel will be scoring your applications, the date our board will be making action on those applications, and then the earliest date that you can start your project. And then down here, we have some information about some alternative ways to apply and a video tutorial for our grant system. So we are going to head over into our grant system. If you already have an account in the system, you could just log in here. If you are totally new, you could create a new account. And if you're not sure if you or someone from your organization already has an account in here, just talk to us and we can get that figured out for you. So you're not creating all kinds of extra accounts. So I'm going to log in here. And I'll just point out, if you also act as a review panelist for us, you'll be taken to that dashboard first. So if you are wanting to apply, you'll need to switch over to your applicant role. But otherwise, if you only are working as an applicant in here, you'll come right to this applicant dashboard. Unless the first time you come in, you'll go straight to this apply page. And this lists all of the grants that we have currently open. Here's our Art Legacy project. If you want to just take a look at the application without actually starting anything, there's this preview button, or you can click apply to get started. So that's what we're going to do. I'm just going to talk about a couple of buttons here at the top first. If you would like to be working in a different language, we do have Google Translate embedded into the system. So you could choose the language you'd want to be working in, and that'll translate the interface and application questions into that language for you. Then we have this copy previous answers button. If your organization has done applications in the system before, you can choose to copy answers over from one of those applications into your new application. It'll copy over anything that has the same questions in both applications. So that can be helpful to just get some of your basic organization information already in there. Then we have our collaborate button, and this allows you to invite someone to work on the application with you. So you would put in their email address here, choose what level of permission you want to give them, and then put in here just a little note what you'd like them to do. Maybe you want them to come in here and attach some work samples or audience numbers or proof things for you or sign the application. So you just invite them, they will get an email, and we'll just need to create a password to come in and work on the application with you. And then up at the top here, we just have a reminder of some ways to get some questions answered. And then you'll need a name for your project. There are some examples here, and here's where you will enter the amount you're going to request. You'll probably want to wait until you've filled out your budget form to enter that, though. And we have links to a couple of those documents we were looking at before and some tips for writing and working in the system. And then you'll start out describing what it is that you are going to be doing. It does remind you that a lot of the details we ask about later. So this description here doesn't need to be very detailed, but just give us all a good starting idea of what this is going to be about. Here's where you will enter your project start and end dates. Then we've got some space for you to put in dates and times and locations of when your public events are going to be. We will use this to post your events on our area arts calendar. Next, you're going to talk about why you have chosen particular programming or artists for this project. So you'll think about what kind of artistic vision you have behind this. Why are you doing this? And then which artists you've chosen and how you decided on that artist. So this is really important that you have indeed chosen an artist at this point and are not still in your request for proposal stage, for instance. You will attach some resumes or bios for your artists involved in the project, and then samples of their work. So these could be images or written material, or you can include links to videos. So there are several upload fields here, and then also several fields where you can provide links. Next, we want you to talk about what you are doing to involve those who we're calling underserved or underrepresented in your project. So we ask you to think about who that might be in your community. You might define those groups by language, socioeconomic level, gender, ability, things like that. So who is not being served by your organization? And then what specifically are you going to do to involve one or more of those groups in your project? So, and we are looking for specific actions that you are actually taking, not something like we're just open to everybody. So there are some examples here of what that might look like. And then we ask specifically about ADA access and how you will ensure that the project will be accessible to people with various disabilities. And it's really important to think beyond just mobility-related disabilities. Then we have you think about the impact and outcomes of this project. We first ask, why is this project important? You'll think about, is this meeting particular artistic needs for different groups of people? Does this make sense for your organization to be doing? Then we ask you, what impact do you expect this project will have in the present? So I know we talk about with these legacy projects about them having a more lasting effect, but we do want you to think about the kinds of changes that you might see take place during the actual period of the grant. So what changes related to artistic skills, knowledge, attitudes, behaviors might you see during this grant project time? How would you plan to measure or prove that those changes have taken place? How are you going to get some feedback or gather results? Again, for those present effects. And then we ask you to talk about the longer term. How will this provide sustainable arts access in your community over the next several years? Do you have future events planned related to this? What are your plans for maintaining things? So we ask you to look at both what are the effects going to be immediately during this grant period, and what are you expecting, and what are your plans for over the next several years after that time? And you've got a spot here to upload if you have a survey that you're planning on using, and also some audience numbers. All right, our next section is kind of about your organization's ability to accomplish this project. We ask about any other key personnel that are involved besides those artists that you would have already talked about. What are you doing for planning? What do you have left to do? What is your marketing plan? How is the community involved? What kind of support are they giving? Are you collaborating with particular organizations? And then we come to the budget form. You can either use, we have an Excel budget form here, or you can create your own budget, hopefully including the same kinds of things. So we're going to open that Excel budget. All right, so here we are. You could enter your project up here, and then you would just start filling in the kinds of costs that you're going to have. So you can write your descriptions here, and we'll throw in some amounts. And you'll see it's adding up down here for you. All right, and then here under the other funding, if you have some other donations that might be going to this project, or if there is ticket income that you might have, any of that income towards the project would go here. And then it does some calculations for you here to determine what amount you can request. So it takes your total cash cost minus your total other funding and says your request cannot exceed $13,800 or the maximum request amount for this grant program, with whichever is less. So here's our Art Legacy projects, 20,000. So 13,800 is obviously less. So that would be how much we could request. But let's say we have a much more expensive project. Now it tells us your request can't exceed 23,800. And in this case, our Art Legacy project max is less. So we could request 20,000. And then there's this profit calculator here, which you want to equal 0. So this tells us we need to come up with $3,800 more of donations or something towards the project so we can get this to equal 0. So you would fill out the form, save it, and then you can upload that back into the application here. And then we have this budget narrative field. If you need to describe some things a little more and it didn't fit into your budget form, if you want to show here were some calculations where we came up with this number, things like that. Then just some information about your organization, mission statement, brief history, what kinds of programs you offer, who you generally serve, some information about your board. You're both answering a few questions here and then providing a list of your board members. And that can either go in this text box or be uploaded here if you just have a document ready to go. And then towards the end here, we're just collecting some data. And this section doesn't have any bearing on your application, just some things that we are asked by the state to collect. So depending on what type of organization you have here, if you are an arts organization, it asks about what are your total expenses for a year. If you are a non-arts organization, what are your total arts expenses for a year? Some demographic information, audience numbers. And then this next section is just all contact information. Here's where you enter in your project director, your authorizing official, mark who your grant writer is so we can contact them if we end up with some questions. And then it asks if you are using a fiscal sponsor. If you choose yes, you'll have room to enter that information. And here is where you would upload that agreement that you have with your fiscal sponsor organization. And then just finishing up with some electronic signatures. And this is a good place to use that collaborate button if you need your fiscal sponsor, for instance, to come in here and sign. So down at the bottom, you could save your application or submit if you're ready. The system is auto saving you as you're working, but if you do click this save application button, it'll give you a list of all of the things left that you need to answer, which, since we didn't do anything, is everything here, but that'll just help you keep track of your progress. And if you wanted to keep working, there's this continue button, but we're going to head back to our dashboard. And here now is our application that we just started, our legacy project. And if you want to go back in and keep working, you can click that edit application link. And this would be the same place to come back to if you're awarded a grant, to find your contract to fill out and your final report. All right, we are going to head back to our slides and stop again if there are questions at this point.
I have a question. This is Sammy Jo Miller.
Hi, go ahead.
If you're working with a city instead of like a nonprofit organization, how would the organization section of the application differ?
The city would just have to answer those questions as best they can.
Okay.
Those would be answered from the city perspective.
Okay, and then we would not need a fiscal sponsor if I'm working.
Correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then one more question. If we're doing like an installation or a mural project with the city, would an ending event be covered under the expenses of the project, or would that be something we would expect the city to fund separately?
It could go either way. You could certainly ask for those costs under the grant.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions at the moment? All right, we will keep moving on. Here are just some tips as you are working on your applications. You do need to put in some thought as to when is the best time to apply for this, especially if you're planning to do a quick support grant for your planning first. In that case, if you're just thinking about this now, you'd probably end up applying for your Art Legacy project next fall. If you are wanting to do that planning stage grant first, but that is not required. So, but just kind of think ahead and look at those start dates and see what works best for your project. Always read the guidelines and criteria carefully. We don't want you to do your whole application and then discover there was something ineligible. So make sure to check those, or certainly run things by us. Also, it's good to start working on your application earlier than you think you need to. You may be trying to track down some work samples from artists, or waiting on something else, or needing to get some questions answered from us. So give yourself plenty of time there. And then you also will have seen in the application that most of the questions have multiple parts to them. So just make sure you're including or touching on all of those in your answers. You can keep your answers nice and clear and concise. No need to feel like you need to kind of pad things out to fill up more of the text boxes. Also, no need for any grant language. You can just use everyday language writing these. It's also good to assume that the people reviewing your application don't know anything about your organization and your project. We are pulling reviewers from around that whole 18 county region. So it is quite likely they don't know anything about your organization, or even not much about your community. So it's good to check for things like making sure you spell out acronyms and describe programs. Just be sure that you're not assuming people will know what you're talking about. And lastly, don't hesitate to contact us. We are here acting as your advocates in the process. That is what we are here for. So ways that we can help you: if you want to talk through your project some before getting started, make sure you're on the right track and under the right grant program, make sure there aren't any eligibility issues. You can also ask us any questions about the application as you're working on it. And then, as we mentioned briefly before, we can take a look at a draft of your application before you submit it. So if you let us know about 2 weeks or so before the deadline, we can guarantee you that we're able to go in there and take a look at it and let you know if you're missing anything. If something we think would be confusing to the reviewers. And this, of course, is not a guarantee that your application will be funded, but we just want to make sure that you're coming in with the best application with all your bases covered. So once you submit your application, we as staff will review it for eligibility and completeness. And if at that stage we see something is missing or there's an eligibility concern, we will contact you and you'll have 48 hours to remedy that. And then at that point, that is our last contact with your application. Staff do not determine what gets funded or not. We're, like I said, here as your advocates in the process. So at that stage, everything gets passed on to a panel of individuals from around our region, and they will score and discuss the applications based on the criteria for this grant program, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And then their scores and comments go to our board as a recommendation about the funding, and our board will then make those final funding decisions. So the criteria that we will be scored on for this grant program include the artistic quality and merit of the project, which is worth 46% of your score. That's why it's so important to have your artist chosen as much as possible and lots of information about them. Then you'll be scored on the impact that this will have on the participants and audience, worth 28% of your score. Then on how well you are working at reaching the underserved through this project, worth 13% of your score. And then your organization's ability to accomplish the project, also with 13%. So you will need to pass on each of these individual criteria as well as overall in order to be considered for funding. After the panel has scored, you have a chance to get a couple extra percentage points added to your score. If you are a first-time applicant to us, if your organization is led by or primarily serving BIPOC or LGBTQ communities or people with disabilities, or if you are from a county that has not been receiving very much funding from us lately. So you could earn up to 3 percentage points here that would be added to your score. If your grant is awarded, you'll have to complete a contract. And then once we have that contract from you, we're able to send out payment of the full award, which is a new thing for us this year. In the past, we had always paid out 80% of the award at the beginning of the project, and then the remaining 20% after the project and final report were completed. So we are excited this year to be able to start paying out that full award all at the beginning of your project. You will need to acknowledge the grant on any of your marketing that you are doing. There will be a credit line in your grant contract that you'll need to use. You will most likely also need to use this Minnesota Legacy logo. And we will send you all of that information so you know the exact wording, the exact logo to put on all of your things. Then we are very aware that things happen while you're doing these projects. Things just come up that might throw a wrench into your plans. If something happens, please contact us. If you are thinking you're going to need to make some changes while your project is going on, we might be able to do things like extend your project end date or approve some changes to your budget if something that you were going to purchase is now no longer available. We can help you come up with something else in the spirit of your project to spend that money on. But we may be able to help you make some changes to continue working on with your project. Then a final report will be due 60 days after your project end date. And it's a good idea as you're just getting started to take a look at that report and see what kinds of information you need to be gathering. You'll obviously need to be gathering whatever it was that you talked about in your method of measuring for your outcomes, but just make sure to check all of those things that you might need just so you have that all when it comes to doing your report. So that is it for our Art Legacy Project grants today. Just some contact information for us. First of all, we have moved over the summer. We are now at 509 West Main Street in Marshall, and our hours are slightly changed there. It is possible that we're there more like 8 to 5 rather than 9 to 4. But if you're kind of on the fringes of those hours planning to stop in, please call ahead and check that somebody is there. So we can take some more questions here if there's anything you'd like to talk about more specifically with your projects. Anything that I can answer for anybody or?
Hi, this is Rhonda.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm the grant writer for the Upper Sioux community, and we're looking at a legacy project with bringing back the Dakota language.
Okay.
As a lost art, obviously. Maybe I have some questions for you, but maybe I could give you a call at some time, or we could chat through it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I will email you a link to grab some time on my calendar.
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions today?
This is Sammy again.
Hi.
I wanted to know an example of like a marketing plan when you're talking about something like a mural or a sculpture, an installation. What are you looking for in terms of a marketing plan?
I think, you probably end up more marketing like this is done, come see it, come to our opening event for this. So as far as making sure those credit lines and logos are on stuff, that would be on your sort of invitations and reminders for that. You'd probably have a like sign or plaque by the mural itself that would say this is where the funding came from. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think we will wrap up here for today. But if any of you have further questions, please contact us and we can talk with you about your projects. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.